The Informed Investor, thanks to Century 21. Smarter, bolder, faster. Go to century21.com.au.
The chairman of Century 21 is Charles Tarbey, who's still laid up with his dodgy shoulder. Evening to you, Charles.
Dodgy shoulder and flu, Steve. It's getting worse.
Both?
It's getting worse, yes.
I hope you had a flu shot.
Well, next week I'm in Hamilton Island for our conference, and it gets worse then because I'm supposed to be working.
Yeah, don't. We've got no sympathy for you now that you've said that. Auction rates around the country. I noticed when I was flicking through the Sunday papers yesterday, a lot of property passed in.
Yes. Yeah, it's been a very interesting time, and again, it's just getting better and better now for people who've been sitting on the fence or those that couldn't afford to buy. It's getting better for them. 59.7% was the clearance rate for the weekend. And when you consider this time last year was 71.3%, that's a significant difference.
Well, given that interest rates are not going up, what's driving that? The fear that they will.
Look, it's I'm hoping it's a fear they will, but it's not. I was talking to my PR guy today, and he writes a nice little piece for me around the Reserve Bank interest rate release every month. He said, I wish they'd do something. He said, I'm sick of just duplicating the same press release month after month. I think what it is, of course, is that the banks have really gone very strange. It's probably the best word I can say. Because when you look at the auction numbers around Sydney itself was 62.7% clearance with 808 properties, better than Melbourne, which is always usually the opposite. Melbourne had 1,132 auctions with a 60.9% clearance rate. So something has gone strange, and we think it's to do with, obviously, the Royal Commission into Banking.
Yes. I was going to say that. I mean, the publicity out of that has been all negative, and people just hear that noise without really perhaps knowing the full detail, and they're thinking to themselves, well, now's not the time, particularly if you're going into property, to go in as an investor.
Yeah, it is really odd. I've never seen the banks behaving this way. I know of people that have been told by their banks it might be time for you to find another lender. So some of them are even tightening their own belts within their own existing client base. So there's just more to it than meets the eye, and I think we'll probably hear more and more as we go on. But I certainly noticed a massive change. Steve, no longer equity has any value. It's got nothing to do. You can have a 50% equity on a property and still can't borrow the balance because affordability becomes the biggest issue of all things.
Yeah, negative outlook on property and not being able to get equity is certainly going to drive those clearance rates down. The Sirius building in the Rocks, for those listening to us outside of Sydney, it's that ugly public housing building that I'm amazed that anyone ever allowed to get built. There's some people trying to suggest that it's got some heritage value. I mean, please, seriously. I feel sorry for the people, the public housing tenants who are being tipped out of there, but the government wants to sell it, realise the asset for the taxpayers of New South Wales, and get that building, I think, renovated. Are they ever going to be able to sell it?
Well, yeah, I watch that building and I drive over the bridge nearly every day, and it looks like a prefab. They've brought in blocks and laid one on top of the other. The agents are estimating $120 million sale value, which is a massive boon for the state government. And when you look at where it's located, you're looking straight. You're right under the bridge. I mean, they have to probably evacuate the building for the annual fireworks display. It's that close.
Oh, that's right. So it's an incredible block of land, but if there's heritage listings on the building and they can't knock it down, that clearly knocks sideways the value, doesn't it?
It would, but I do think that the only heritage value it really has is that it's such an odd building. And there are plenty of other buildings that qualify, in my view, for heritage listing than that particular building does.
How is the general feeling about apartments across Sydney? And we've had a lot of talk-back discussion, particularly on my colleague Ray Hadley's program, about how they're mushrooming in places like Parramatta and in the northeast. There's just apartment buildings springing up like mushrooms. What's the general feeling about how the market's travelling?
You and I have spoken about this before, and I'm a bit nervous about it in certain parts. I think that it's reaching a point now where there are some people that have done pretty well out of it. They might have bought 2 or 3 years ago, and the valuations are still a little bit higher than off the plan price. But I think that's coming to a close. I think there are a lot of people that bought maybe a year ago, and not those that bought 2 or 3. Those are the ones that are probably going to be impacted most. And I do fear, we did flag this about a year and a half ago, but what I fear most is that the banking changes that have kicked in due to the Royal Commission, which we never expected, are probably going to have a bigger impact on that area of the market than we think.
Melbourne in the same situation?
Certain areas of Melbourne, absolutely. There are apartment blocks there. They went through that with Southbank, and in a major way. I always get it wrong. Is it Southbank? I get it wrong between that and Brisbane.
No, Southbank, yep.
Yeah, and
Dockland, Southbank, but I mean Southbank is really where most of those big apartment buildings that are 30, 40 stories high. Yep.
Yeah, they went up there years ago, and they had that problem then. I mean, I don't think it's the supply or the demand issue as much as I think the ability to finance is going to be the biggest part of it, and the overseas money that came into this country to buy property, well, it's not there, and those people that maybe put 10% down, they can't get their money out of certain parts of Asia. They're not going to care. They'll just...
That's the Chinese buyers.
Yes, so I think that these are issues we haven't seen before. But again, the one thing that is the grey area is the Royal Commission into banking.
So the Chinese money seems to be drying up. Geelong, there's no problem there. They're selling blocks of land. How much sold in 24 hours?
Oh, it's an amazing situation there. But then again, Steve, you've got to think Geelong, it's a centre unto its own, and I think the pricing wise, it's done very well from a pricing perspective or pricing point compared to other parts of Melbourne. So I don't see it as an issue there. That area there has been a very strong area for a very long time. What's the football team like?
They're always strong. And what's going to happen with that part of the western spread of Melbourne is that the state government, doesn't matter whether it's the current state government of Daniel Andrews or whether it's Matthew Guy who might win the election when it's held in November, they're constantly talking about improving public transport access from Geelong to Melbourne. And if they can get that train to be half decently quick, then it's a great part of the world to live. I mean, Geelong's a wonderful community. Yeah,
actually, much of that is closer to the airport and closer to the city than other parts of Melbourne.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is if you're driving into the Melbourne CBD on a regular basis, the Westgate Bridge is a drama, but Daniel Andrews has promised to spend hundreds of millions of dollars building a second crossing, and he's going to put a tunnel underneath the river so you don't have to go over the bridge. So if all of those things come together, I'm not surprised there's people camping out for 24 hours to try and buy a block of land.
Exactly. That's what happened in parts of Brisbane, and it's also happening in parts of Sydney now. The freeway connections between the M4, the M5.
Yeah, that's what does it. That's what does it. Charles, thank you, mate. It's always a pleasure to catch up. I hope your shoulder gets better. I'll catch up with you next week.
Thank you.
Catch up with you next week.